Last week, my video had to do with the cold snap that came in over Christmas weekend. And because of that video, I have received a lot of questions regarding how do I heat my home, as well as some suggestions of ways that I can heat my home more efficiently during the winter months. But before we dive into this conversation, let me just tell you that it is incredibly warm in the cabin right now. I have yet to start a fire in the cabin, and up here in the loft, it is 70 degrees right now. Typically, this is how I would heat my water up for coffee in the morning. However, as you can see by this fan here, the wood stove is cold because I haven't stoked the fire since loading it last night, probably around 8 o'clock in the evening. Right now, there's just one small piece of wood that's left in the wood stove from last night. Before I light the wood stove though, let's head into the living room and see what the temperature is here on the main level. Well, you can see it's 13 degrees cooler here on the main level of the cabin. I'm sure that fire died out probably around midnight or so. And right now it is about 10 o'clock in the morning and it is still really comfortable in the cabin. Now, before I get too far into this conversation, for those of you who are new to my channel, I should probably give you a little bit of information regarding my cabin itself. I live in a remote cabin. Now, my cabin's not remote by the Alaska definition, meaning that I'm not off the road system and I don't have to take a snow machine or a side-by-side to get to my property. However, the federal government and the state of Alaska consider the area in which I live to be remote, and I'm remote in the fact that I don't have any neighbors for several miles around me, and my cabin backs up to the Wrangell St. Elias National Park, which is made up of 15 million acres, and my cabin is only partially off-grid, meaning that I'm not connected to any public utilities other than electricity. And because I'm on the road system, I can get deliveries of both wood and oil to my property. Now, my cabin is 2,500 square feet in total. However, 900 of that is made up of the root cellar below me, and about 300 is the Arctic entry. Today, I'm just focusing on the main living quarters of the cabin. The main floor is an additional 900 square feet and is comprised of the dining and kitchen area, my pantry, and then the living room where I'm standing right now. The living room is open to the second level, which is comprised of 2 lofts and then one room that is walled off and has a door on it, and that is where my office is. Now, my cabin would be considered to be rather large for a remote cabin in Alaska. It's not to say that it's the largest by any means, because there are definitely those that are greater in size than where I live. So let's talk about how I heat the cabin, and then we'll move into some of the suggestions that have been made. I primarily heat the cabin with wood, and I'm typically burning 2-year seasoned birch in my wood stove. It has the best BTU outputs. I could go out and harvest wood myself. However, there's not a lot of birch where I live. It's primarily spruce and aspen and cottonwoods on this side of the state. Now, my bedroom is located in the loft and it sits right above where the wood stove is. So that heat is radiating up through the floorboards and the chimney, and then it is actually getting trapped in this area back here where the ceiling is sloped down to its lowest point. And even though behind this wall is the Arctic entry, which is not insulated, I don't feel the cold radiating in from this wall whatsoever. At night, I sleep really comfortably. Most nights. Some nights I'm way too warm and I wind up kicking all of these covers back. But as you can see, I have several layers of blanketing on the bed. And because of that, I find that I don't actually need to supplement the heat source up here in my bed at night. Whether Kenai's sleeping with me or not, I am very comfortable up here. Even the night when it got down to about 20 degrees on the main level of the cabin, it was probably still about 10 degrees warmer up here And then, with my body heat being trapped underneath all these blankets, I have slept really, really well. But one other thing that I did in this cabin to help heat the cabin up was I installed a ceiling fan right here on the main ridge pole of the cabin. And that is blowing all the hot air from up here and circulating it through the main part of the cabin. So you can see that there is a lot of airspace in this cabin to heat up. And for the most part, the wood stove does a fantastic job of doing that, especially when I use that ceiling fan. However, I do supplement the heat by using my oil burner. Now, there's something that I would like to clarify from my last video, and that is that I had made the statement that if I was running the oil burner at max capacity, that I would exhaust the 300 gallons of heating oil in about 2 weeks' time. Well, max capacity means setting that thermostat well above 80 degrees and running it full time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Then yes, it would burn through that much oil. But that's not what I do, and I can't imagine most people would. Typically, I have the oil burner set to between 50 and 64 degrees, depending upon the weather outside. Now, if it's going to be stormy outside and there's going to be some cold winds coming through that can rob the cabin of its heat, then yes, I will kick it up to about 64 degrees. But for the most part, I have it consistently set at 50 degrees, or I have it shut off. And I'll explain why in just a moment. If I'm running the oil burner at the typical range of between 50 and 64 degrees, then the oil tank will last me several months. I started out this winter using the oil burner at the beginning of October, maybe late September. And it wasn't until the end of December that it ran dry and there was only about 200 gallons of fuel in there. So to be honest, the oil burner is not using up as much oil as I made it sound like in my last video. Now, there was also the comment of I could get a larger tank on my property. However, again, I don't really find that that should be necessary because, again, 300 gallons should last me for at least 3 to 4 months if I'm using the oil burner conservatively. And I had stated it in my last video that I had been a little bit heavy-handed on the oil burner itself. Next summer, I will add a sight gauge to the oil tank so I can view the level from inside the cabin. And additionally, I should mention that the oil burner as well as the wood stove are several decades old, anywhere from 20 to 30 years of age on these two items, and they're not as efficient as they should be. So I'm going to wind up upgrading the wood stove either to a wood cook stove or to a Blaze King, and the Blaze King is probably going to heat me out of the cabin from my understanding. What I do want to talk about is that 50 to 55 degrees that I keep the cabin set at. I cannot explain to you that why in Alaska 50 to 55 degrees is the sweet spot, but if it gets much warmer than that, even in the summertime, it feels extremely hot here. In Colorado, 55 degrees, you're definitely having a light sweater on, whether it's summertime or not. I always kept my home in Colorado set to between 70 and 72 degrees. And there were many mornings when I would wake up and I wouldn't want to get out from underneath the covers because I could just feel that cold air circulating around. And I would think, oh God, no. You want to go back to sleep? Yeah. And I'm sure you've experienced that in your own home too, despite the furnace running all night. Well, here, the wood stove does a fantastic job of heating the cabin, and the oil burner will supplement that to keep it at 55 degrees. Why do I shut the oil burner off though? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is because it's noisy. I'm going to take my earbuds out and I'm going to let you listen to how quiet it is here in the cabin without anything running. Okay, so I've taken my earpods out. You can see them right behind me. And there's a small hum in the air. That hum is coming from the fluorescent light as well as my freezers in my pantry. It's pretty quiet, right? Well, let me kick on that oil burner and let you listen to how loud it is when it first kicks on. Can you hear that? Can you hear how noisy that is? And that noise radiates through the cabin along with any heat that's pumping out. It's annoying. And it's even louder when it goes to shut off. The other thing is that the lowest I can set the oil burner to is 50 degrees. So if I'm already keeping it between 50 and 55, as soon as that temperature hits 50 degrees, that thing's kicking on and it's just constantly running then. I'd rather just load up the wood stove, to be honest with you. I'm already buying the wood. I just don't see the need for the double expense. This is a great backup heat source, but I don't really like using them in conjunction every day. I load up the wood stove before going to bed and let it burn through the night. I dampen it down so that it's not running, on full steam ahead. And it generally keeps the cabin warm through the night. But then about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning is when the oil burner kicks on. And that's my alarm clock. I don't set an alarm clock otherwise. That thing wakes me up every morning. And it's not a pleasant way to wake up, to a clink, 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 clink. But that's what it is. So that's one of the reasons that I shut it off. Another one of the reasons is because I don't like the expense that goes into using the oil burner. I do think it's costly to use. I just had the tank filled last week and it cost me $3.85 a gallon. And when you multiply that out times 300, it was $1,200 to fill that tank. And $1,200, even if it's 3 months, that's $400 a month in just the heating fuel. Then there's electricity that goes into running the oil burner as well. To me, that's an added expense that I don't need, especially if the wood stove can do a phenomenal job of heating the cabin on most days. The wood stove doesn't have the same issues. It's not loud by any means, and the heat that it provides is more comforting in my opinion. Considering the oil burner doesn't do a good enough job by itself to heat up the whole cabin, my preferred way of heating is with the wood stove. I also use the wood stove to cook, so I can't do that on the oil burner. I bake on top of my wood stove and I bake in my wood stove, as well as I make my hot water on there, water for cleaning. That wood stove really is the heart of my home. Now, it's been suggested that during the winter months, I close up these openings behind me and I reside here in the kitchen. And one of my viewers, Mike, was kind enough to send me a kit to do just that. It's essentially a plastic tarp and a zipper so I can create an opening, and then some tape so I could secure the whole thing to the walls and the rafters right above the kitchen here. However, Mike, as much as I appreciate you sending me that, I actually have some other plans for that I'll use in the future when I do some more construction here on the cabin. Now, I can see why the suggestion has been made several times. As I mentioned, there's a lot of airspace to heat up in this cabin, and this room has the lowest ceiling and is already walled off for a good portion of it by my shelves here behind me. However, we have to keep a couple things in mind. One is that heat rises. So the heat's automatically going to go up to the sleeping loft above me. And in that case, why not just sleep where the heat's going anyhow? Even if I block this off, the heat's still going to rise. And believe it or not, I did start the wood stove between takes of filming, and it's colder right here, right now, standing in front of the wood stove than it is upstairs. And I'm just going to grab the thermostat. I'm going to grab the thermometer off the top of the wood stove so you can see what the temperature is right now on the wood stove. That is if I don't burn myself on the chimney. So the wood stove isn't that warm right now. Can you see that? Excuse how dirty my thing is, but it's about 175 degrees on top of the wood stove. And yet standing right in front of it, it's not that warm. Now, I also want you to realize that the floor underneath me is insulated. When I had a bunch of construction done on my cabin this past summer, and I had all the nasty fiberglass insulation removed, I did put up Reflectix in the ceiling to replace it. And that Reflectix has done a great job of keeping the cold down below and not allowing the heat from up here to be transferred through the floor and into the root cellar. The root cellar right now is about 35 degrees. So there's a big difference, right? 35 down there, 57 on the main level, and 70 up above. So, 20 degrees difference between each level is pretty significant. And last night, I did not have, is that true? No, last night I did not have the fan running, circulating the air through the cabin. So that right there tells you that if I don't do that, it's going to stay warm up in the loft. So again, I might as well sleep in the loft. Now, I don't have a problem sleeping in my kitchen because I already did that. The first 8 months that I lived in the cabin, I actually slept on a cot beneath the kitchen window. And, it's just a few feet from the wood stove here. And that was fine because I didn't have the bed set up in the cabin yet. I didn't have anywhere else to sleep. And honestly, there's such a low window right there that I would stare out the window and watch the stars many nights. And the temperature here changes day to day. It's, like I said, 9 days later. Right now, I'm just wearing a thin, summer style dress that's sleeveless. I've got on a thin sweater, and I'm completely comfortable in the cabin right now. And the only reason I started the wood stove, to be honest with you, was because I wanted a cup of coffee, and I don't really want to use the butane stove to heat up the water unless I have to. Again, being more on the frugal side. The other thing is that I bought this cabin to live in my cabin, the entirety of my cabin. Now, I realize my cabin is a lot of cabin for just one person, but I am not a minimalist by any means. I love my possessions, wrong or right, that's just how it is. And I want to utilize the full capacity of what my cabin has to offer. And I also work from home, which means I need to use my office. So it would make sense if I was going to utilize the main level of the cabin day in and day out. But because I work from home and I utilize a desktop, not a laptop, and I have several monitors that I use for my day job, plus my editing computer and monitor, which are two separate entities, since I work for somebody else during the day, I don't want to intermingle the two. I'm not going to be transporting those things down here and then back upstairs when the temperature changes. And I plan on using the full capacity of the space that I have available to me in my cabin. I don't see any need to confine myself to one part of this cabin, especially when winter's here, lasts between 8 and 9 months. Now, there's been some questions regarding the food in my pantry and things that froze in the cabin. And I just wanted to say that the day that the temperatures dropped to 20 degrees in the cabin, I did not think of checking the food in the pantry. My brain was not there at that moment. But I can tell you that I have not noticed anything to have broken the seal on the jars or to have spoiled or anything like that in the cabin. Here's some jars that I received from Gnomestead, and they appear to be fine. The lids are not popping off at all. They're not popped up. Neither are the jars of canned goods that I got, store-bought, or these flip type top jars all seem to be fine. One of the other things that I was afraid was going to freeze were my eggs. And I keep my eggs water glassed in the pantry. and all of my eggs are fine. They're not cracked. I've cooked some of these eggs since then, and I've had no issues whatsoever with any spoilage of any of the food in the pantry. All of my root crops are in sand. My potatoes are actually stored in paper bags, and then they're inside crates, and then they're insulated in the area in which they're stored. And I didn't have any damage to any of those things either. So I count myself as lucky that I didn't have any food spoil in that storm. And I also count myself lucky that the filters in my Berkey water filter didn't freeze either. Now, that's probably because I only had about half an inch of water in the top of the container itself.
Oh, yeah.
I actually hadn't filled the Berkey for several days prior to the freeze happening. So that's, I think, a 3-gallon Berkey, and I don't drink 3 gallons in a very quick period of time. Even though Kenai is drinking a lot of water, I typically am not drinking that much water. I know I should, I just don't. And so I've lucked out that those did not freeze. But these are all things that should be taken into consideration, you know, and I did find that day that it was 20 degrees in the cabin, it was 31 degrees in the cellar. So it was just below freezing in the cellar. So I do assume that if these things were allowed to stay down there in the cellar, that yes, I may actually wind up losing some of my food. So while I mentioned that I have the Reflectix in the rafters of the cellar, I am going to actually run some Reflectix down the walls of my cellar and look at other ways of maintaining a good temperature down there, so that I don't have to worry about the food freezing in the coming years. I want everybody to know that I appreciate all of your comments. While I might not get the opportunity to respond to everybody, I do at least appreciate the suggestions that are being made, and I do take them into consideration. I might not follow all of the suggestions that are being passed along, but there are some that I do plan on potentially implementing for various reasons or another. One of those, for example, is Ron over at Off-Grid Homestead McGarvey Style sent me this photo of a cabin, and I need to redo the upper level of my cabin, as I talked about in my last video. But not only on the inside do I need to cover up this foam, but on the outside as well, because I just have dimensional lumber on there that's about 50 years old, and it's twisted and it's warped, and it's got some air gaps that are coming in, and I think it's also ways some of the rodents got into the cabin earlier this winter. But this picture he sent me is exactly what I need to do on the upper level on the outside of my cabin. So thank you, Ron, for that. And also I want to say thank you, Joanna, for this cute picture of Violet watching Kenai. Yes, you got a fan club, watching Kenai on the television. And with that, I've been meaning to pass along some well wishes to Grammy. I hope that you're on the mend and that you and Bonnie are looking forward to many happy days yet to come in 2023 and beyond. And with that being said, I'm going to sign off for today, but be sure to stick around for some outtakes. And as always, be sure to subscribe if you haven't, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and check back in next week to see what's happening here at my property. What are you doing? Oh, and Kenai's waving bye. Say bye. Starting with the size of my cabin. Just the main footprint of my cabin is 600 feet on the main level. 600 feet? No, it is not. My cabin, just the main living quarters of my cabin is 900 square feet on the main level, and an additional 600 feet on the upper level. 250, so 600. Do math. Last week's video had to do with the recent cold snap that came through over Well, you can see it's 13 degrees here on the main level of the cabin.
Say that again.
It's 13 degrees here on the main level of the cabin. I forgot where I was going. I do that almost every video. I just talk and talk and talk and talk. I'm sorry.